Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, we are still digesting the consequences of the last presidential election. A few days ago, we had my old friend Bill Darasewicz on the show, the cultural critic, who has a new essay out entitled, appropriately enough, Post-Election, which notes the lack of vitality on the left, the fact that in his view, the American left or American progressives have lost their way, have lost energy, and have become essentially conservatives. There's been a lot of criticism on the left, of the left, and my guest today, Joan C. Williams, has a parallel critique. It's not similar to Bill's, but I think it goes together in some way. She has a new book out. It's called Outclassed: How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. She is normally based up the road from me in San Francisco, but she is currently in Washington, D.C., celebrating the publication of Outclassed. Joan, to what extent is the last election, the 2024 presidential election, exhibit A in your argument of how the left in America lost the working class?
It is Exhibit A. You're completely right there. Although I wrote this book and largely finished it before the election. In 2016, when Trump won, much of the left told themselves it was just because of racism. And there's something to that. Racism is actually one of the strongest predictors of votes for Trump. But that's not why he won, because there are not enough of those people to elect a president. He won both in 2016 and this time because a much larger group of people voted for him. And the data from the 2016 election found that this other group of people who voted for him, often called the anti-elites, have racial attitudes not much different from those of non-Trump voters. And this became so clear in this election that this was not just all about race, although race is always important, because non-college people of color in general, and also non-college Latinos, shifted away from Democrats by 35 points, if you look 2012 to this election. And non-college Blacks have shifted away from Democrats by 30 points. So, and the shift was even larger, which is another kind of shocking element of it, among younger voters. So young Black Americans shifted away from Democrats by 42 points, and young Hispanics by 45 points. So this huge shift among people of color, driven in significant part by men, was really, I think, took many progressives aback.
Yeah, and of course, the one word that summarizes that, at least from certain kinds of progressives, is deplorables. You're clearly a woman of the left. There's no ambiguity there. The right critique, Joan, don't need me to tell you this, of Trump's victory and the failure of the Democrats is wokeness. Is your critique a kind of critique of wokeness from the left? Is that one way of summarizing Outclassed, or is that incorrect?
I think I'm a little bit different. After all, as I mentioned before we started, I'm in the middle of two debates now. This is one. The other one is the attack on DEI. I've done 10, 15 years of work on DEI and probably 40 years of work on feminism. So I'm not one of the kind of old-timey folks who says class is everything and we should really step away from identity politics. I don't find that very convincing, but I do think it's really important to recognize that the far right is kind of a one-trick pony, but it's a really powerful trick. What they do is they harness economic anger and they transmute it into culture wars. And what Democrats and the left need to do is to understand if they're going to transmute it into culture wars, we have to understand how to transmute it back. But in order to do that, we need to use a concept that's really well known in DEI circles, which is cultural competence. We need college graduates need the cultural competence to be able to connect with voters without degrees, who are often live very different lives with very different values, a very different style culture than we.
You got to believe in what you call cultural competence. You note that the mistaken view of Trump's 2016 election was race. Is there a preoccupation on the left with race away? And that's why I asked the question on wokeness. By viewing everything through race, whereas you're offering an alternative in Outclassed and in a lot of your other work, thinking of America not in racial terms, but in class terms?
I think this is not a zero-sum game. I mean, one of the things that always fascinates me is that people don't think if you believe in racial analysis that you shouldn't believe in gender, that gender is important. I believe that class is important. I think race is also important. These are, Scott Fitzgerald said the sign of intelligence is the ability to keep two incompatible thoughts in your mind at the same time. What we need to do are incompatible thoughts. Race is playing a role. Racism is playing a role. Class is playing a role. And classism is playing a role. And so is gender, by the way. These relate in ways that are far too complicated to be interesting to anybody but a professor.
What's the history of this, Joan? We've done a number of books, one with David Leonhardt, who argued that the left lost the working class in June 1968 when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. So this is not a new thing. Many other books have been written about this. When, in your view, and the subtitle of the book is How the Left Lost the Working Class, when did the left begin losing the working class? Was it during the 60s and the split between the so-called hard hats, the working class union leftists, and Students for a Democratic Society? You're a political warrior too, so you probably have lots of personal memories of those times.
Yeah, no, it was my generation of hippies that started this out. And what really happened is that after World War II, wages rose when productivity did, and then that stopped. If it had continued, wages would be 43% higher than they are today. And 3/4 of that decline, by the way, took place in the 15 years before the 2016 election. In exactly that period, my generation of hippies, and I was one of them, shifted attention away from creating a stable life for blue-collar families, which was the focus during the New Deal, and arguably until around in the 1960s. And we focused attention instead on environmentalism, racism, sexism, and other issues of greater interest to upper middle class college kids than the fate of blue collar families. And so you had this not very healthy combination of just when blue collar Americans were really getting screwed economically, that the attention of the Democratic Party focused largely on the chief concerns of college grads. And the last election was a really, really good example. I'm very sad to say. If you look at issue salience among Trump voters and Harris voters, there's a really big difference. First of all, defense of democracy is way high up for Democrats, but it's way, way down for Trump voters. What Trump voters tended to care about were inflation in the economy, much more so than the cultural issues, much more so than defense of democracy. Many in the kind of fragile and failing middle class in the US, they feel like democracy has failed them over the last 40 years for a really simple reason. Democracy has failed them. Virtually all Americans used to do better than their parents, earn more than their parents did. But for those born in the 1980s, it's now just an even shot. And so the middle 50% of Americans has really seen the fading of the American dream. And I think of that ad that reportedly was one of the most influential ads in the 2024 campaign, which is Harris cares about they, them, but Trump cares about you. And that ad picked up, no doubt, people who were transphobic, as we would say in my circles, but it also picked up a much broader range of people who were very, very dissatisfied that the Democrats were not focusing centrally on inflation and economic issues. For a long time, Democratic pundits said inflation was just transitory and we shouldn't really worry about it. Well, again, there were some, I think it's important not to blame this all on Harris. I mean, this problem started long before Harris, and she was dealt a very, very weak hand because Biden stayed in so long. But on the other hand, to make joy a central feature of the campaign, Trump is brilliant at connecting emotionally with people who feel screwed by elites. They have been screwed by elites. Right. They've been screwed by the business elites.
I take your point, Joan. You're not the first or the last to make this argument. Your new book is about the working class, so it rests on, if not class analysis, certainly making class central. Marx, of course, the father of all class analysis, argued that whether we know it or not, we act out of class interest. I wonder, you make the note that your hippie generation became interested in the environment and race and gender, whether there's a class element here. One of the reasons why the Democrats have become essentially the small c conservative party in America is that the coastal elites are very comfortable with the economic arrangement. Where you live, San Francisco, where I live, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York City, it's all made up of 2020s Democrats, white-collar Democrats who are doing very well out of the system. They might fetishize race or gender or the environment, but they are essentially conservative because the system is working for them. Can we, Joan, escape our economic class interest? Does everyone essentially, whether they know it or like it or not, act out of economic class interest, depending whether they're in what you call the working class or the middle class, the knowledge class?
Well, the perspective on class I bring is not directly from Marx. It's really from a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu. And one of the points that Pierre Bourdieu made is that class is expressed through economics, for sure, but it's also expressed through cultural differences. And what I'm trying to explain is to the college-educated liberals how they are culturally different from the this middle 50%, what we often call blue-collar Americans, and how the Republicans, and especially the far right, has bent over backwards to understand how to connect with this group, and that unfortunately liberals and the left hasn't. In terms of the sort of classic Marxian, everybody enacts their class interest, I think one of the things that really complicates that is the importance of race and gender. But another thing that it complicates that, and here is the opportunity for coalition at this point, is that at this point, even younger college grads are getting screwed economically. They have big college debts. They can't afford a house, God knows, in San Francisco. I mean, I had 2 kids move away from San Francisco in part because they couldn't afford houses there. They can't afford childcare. Many of them can't afford health care. And income inequality in the US, which has become so extreme, is now, I mean, this is the bad news, but it does hold the potential for coalition. The broad blue collar, the middle 50%, had long ago saw a stable middle class life disappearing. Hard work no longer yielded a stable middle class life. But we're seeing the same thing now for younger college educated people, which is one of the reasons, one of the things that shocked many people about the 2024 election was that young people moved away from Democrats by 19 points. And if you look at why they did, it was because Democrats didn't focus enough on the fact that they were struggling economically. Now, I think that so is the solution for, as Roy Teixeira and some other people say, just for the left to focus on blue collar economics, period? I think that's very unrealistic given the coalition in the United States today on the left. My crowd of race and gender people, we're not going to put our other goals aside, nor would the climate change people. I think that there have to be 2 things. And the 2 things actually are best illustrated by the gay marriage victory. The gay marriage victory, which was one of the most stunning successes of certainly my life, and I suspect yours, and very unexpected.
We've done shows on that. There's been some very good books on the success of gay marriage.
What happened in gay marriage is 2 things, really. They changed messaging, but they also, and very importantly, they changed priorities, because the gay liberation movement was not focused on marriage. Much of it was pretty hostile to marriage or extremely uninterested in marriage. They were interested in celebrating a wide range of sexualities, a reorganization of intimacy so that a wide range of relationships was given legal rights using the language of equality. All of that is very consonant with the culture of college grads who focus on self-development, not only career, but also sexual self-development. They're very focused on the language of equality. But what the gay marriage movement did, and this comes from an interview with my colleague Matt Coles, who teaches with me at UC Law, who headed up the Marriage Equality Project for the ACLU. Matt said that they shifted to marriage because they realized that, to quote Matt, our people wanted it. He recounted to me after they got domestic partnerships in San Francisco that he went to see the celebration where people came the first day and saw people doing a promenade down the grand staircase. And he said, I suddenly got it. He said, these weren't doctors or lawyers. These were ordinary, average people. And for them, it was the prom, it was the wedding ceremony, it was the ability to say, Mom, yeah, I got married. In other words, what the elite gatekeepers realized is that many people didn't want to smash the hegemony. They just wanted to join the hegemony. and they changed
But that
priorities.
sounds to me,
They
Joan, an
focused on
incredibly
gay marriage.
conservative argument. It's basically Andrew Sullivan's argument, one of the big pioneers of gay marriage, that gays are conservative as mainstream people, and that they embrace the incredibly conservative institution of marriage. Is that what you're saying? I mean, what is you seem to be?
I'm not making a value judgment.
Well, you are
I'm
making
just
a value
noticing.
judgment in the book about being outclassed. I mean, it's a polemic suggesting that the Democrats have made the mistake. You talk about something called cultural competence and messaging. What exactly should this message be? Should it be a message about valuing cultural institutions like marriage, like the family? Then what makes the left the left?
I think what makes the left, to go back to the gay marriage example, is you'll notice that the leaders of the gay liberation movement didn't say, "Oh, people are very homophobic, so we better shut up." They didn't say that. They kept to their basic agenda of fighting for greater social acceptance of people who were not straight. What they did, though, is that they realized that the way they were going to bring along the American public, and remember, this started out with like 24% endorsement by the American public. And in a startlingly short period, it was like up to 75% endorsement. They realized that the way to get gay people accepted and their sexuality accepted and thought of in a different way was to tap into values that their audience already had. Not the values that they necessarily cherished most deeply, but the values that the audience had, and we would be persuasive to the audience. And that changed the conception of gay people. It changed the conception,
I take your point, but it sounds, another way of putting this is it's a kind of what some people, at least on the left, would describe as Clintonian triangulation. You tell people what they want to hear.
Not at all.
This is not. Aren't you suggesting that you're telling people what they want to hear?
If you think that connect messaging to people, okay, I'll give you another example: climate change. Now, I'm pretty upset about climate change. I suspect you might be too. Maybe not. A lot of people are upset about climate change. I have no intention of backing off of how important climate change is. On the other hand, pursuing my passion about climate change by calling people climate deniers is just undercutting my ability to see real action on climate change, because it's perceived as college-educated people calling non-college educated people stupid and ignorant. And that just drives them into the hands of the far right. Are there any alternatives? Yeah, they're really once you develop this basic class competence, you can use the place loyalty, which is very, very deeply rooted in this middle 50%. They are very, very loyal to the places they grew up. My crowd is they're very proud of being a global elite, but not the people we need to persuade about the importance of climate change. So you say to them, it's really an outrage that because of the preferences of big oil, you can't farm the way your grandfather farmed. And also, family farms, one of the things that the Inflation Reduction Act did is to give hard-strapped people who own family farms additional cash flow through wind farms and solar farms. And that's great. So Republicans are going to take that away. It is very easy, once you kind of understand the basic grammar of what I call the class culture gap, the difference between the culture of college-educated elites and the culture of ordinary average people, to quote Matt. It's becomes easier to explain to people why they should care about the issues that we care about. Now, it's important, though, that none of that is going to work if you don't put at the center, first and up front, anybody who works hard in America deserves a stable middle class standard of living. No more three part-time jobs. No more three part-time jobs. Benefits. Not the way this country should run. This country, you deserve a stable middle class standard of living, whether you have a college degree or not. That doesn't mean we have to gang up on poor people, but it does mean that, again, you go back, hard work is a very cherished value. Among the college educated elite, we tend to pride ourselves on being sophisticated, articulate, and smart. In the working class, one insightful author said they turn servitude into honor. So what they need is the self-discipline that you need to get up every day on time without an attitude to a not very fascinating job often. They need that self-discipline. They value the institutions, the traditional institutions that anchor that self-discipline, religion, the military, traditional gender roles. That's what they value because it makes sense in terms of the jobs that they have and they're raising their children to have. So if you connect with, our values reflect our lives, and our lives reflect either our privilege or our lack of privilege. That is the deeply economic structural part of this, but it's expressed culturally. So we need to deliver for these people, which God knows I'm a Democrat, a lifelong Democrat. I'll be a Democrat till I take my last breath, a frustrated Democrat, as many of us are. We need to deliver economically for these people, and we need to talk their language.
Joan, you begin the book very anecdotally with a description of your own marriage. You married somebody from the Midwest.
No, actually, Waterbury, Connecticut.
Sorry, but the story is about a kind of your introduction to, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, working class culture. Tell me a little bit about the marriage and why you began the book with those anecdotes.
I began the book with the anecdote where the first time my future in-laws ever visited my husband and me, this was in Somerville, Massachusetts. We were both going to Harvard Law School, but they came from a Rust Belt town. And we were all cooking, we were all cleaning up after dinner. And my mother-in-law asked me, "Where do you keep the butter?" And I said,
it's a great story.
What does he think I am, a Martian? So I just said, "I keep it under the bed." So I was like, "What?" She put the butter under the bed. And that's when I realized, I think she's really weird. I mean, first of all, my parents would never stay with us. Who are these people staying in our apartment? My parents would have taken us out to dinner. They didn't take us out to dinner. My parents wouldn't have helped with the dishes. It was just, everything was different. I realized that I thought they were weird and they thought I was equally weird, that there was a real culture gap between just their everydayness of their lives and mine. And that really began, a lifelong, just as I've been fascinated by race and gender and how they shape what is common sense in profoundly different ways for different groups. The same is true of class.
I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Arlie Hochschild, the sociologist in Berkeley, just over the bay.
Yes, no, Arlie.
And symbolically, she made the same journey as you. What's been the reaction to your argument, not on the left, not in Cambridge, but in Kansas or in places like Kansas? Thomas Frank, of course, is very famous for his book, What's the Matter with Kansas? He's one of, I think, the founding figures in a populist leftism. You ask, what's the matter, not with Kansas, but with Cambridge? How is your argument? How does it go down amongst working class Americans?
Well, we'll see. I'm just beginning the book tour. But I can just tell you the last time I was on book tour with a book that carried some of the same messages, I went on Fox and I introduced myself as a San Francisco liberal.
Was
And
that
I started,
the white working class book?
that was the white working class book. And I talked about how the working class in this country had gotten screwed. And the host was very disoriented and it became a bit of a love fest. And it is pretty shocking, to go back to your earlier point, that it is shocking for a San Francisco progressive to come on to the news and talk about how the working class has gotten screwed. There's one study of Tucker Carlson, of all people, not a working class person, either in origin or in self-presentation. And it found that in, I think, a 5 or 6 year period, in 70% of his shows, he was railing against elites, including economic elites. I mean, the one trick pony element of the far left, and this is true abroad as well as in the United States, is to take anger against economic elites and redirect it against political elites and cultural elites, the kind of my woke crowd. And the move for the left, from a kind of deep structure standpoint, is to take that anger and redirect it against the people who actually should own that anger, which is the economic elites who have basically robbed workers' proportion of productivity for decades.
But isn't the problem politically, Joan, that many of those economic elites are in the Democratic, for better or worse, are in the Democratic Party themselves. They're senior lawyers. They're in the tech business down in Silicon Valley. They work for the government. They're in business. They're in banking. So how does that work within the Democratic Party?
Republican donors are smart enough so that they tolerate anti-elitist rhetoric. Democratic donors need to get smart too. I mean, you've probably heard stories, and I have as well, that Kamala Harris actually started out in a speech in North Carolina decrying price gouging and using anti-elitist rhetoric. And then she was reportedly told to back off. And she did. And she focused on defense of democracy and abortion rights. Two issues, I should say, very cherished by me, but also very class-linked. Very, very cherished by the college-educated elites that in the Democratic Party. Now, the question is, do you want to mind meld? Or do you want to win? If you want to mind meld, don't change anything. One major pundit said recently, what Democrats are looking for is a catharsis. And my reaction is, I'm not looking for a catharsis. This is not about my emotions. I'm looking for a coalition that can win. And you're right that there are some influential economic elites. God knows we've seen them trooping to the White House. They used to be Democrats. Who knows what they are? I don't think they were very political in the Democratic Party. But you know what? There are a lot more in the Republican Party, and they're doing a great job at appealing to the working class. So having elites in your party does not preclude your ability to mobilize and entrance the working class. We've certainly seen that.
It's not just about messaging. The Republicans have an argument, maybe bogus, but about trade, about tariffs, about America's role in the world in terms of empowering the working class. I take your point on messaging, and obviously it goes without saying that Democrats don't want to, a la Hillary, alienate working class Americans, but it requires structural change too. It requires rethinking capitalism. You noted earlier that Democrats should be telling Americans that they don't need to work 3 jobs. I take your point, and I don't think anyone would necessarily argue with that. But that requires a profound change in the architecture of American capitalism. So it's more than just messaging, isn't it?
I am not sort of the view that things aren't going to get better until we have a profound change in, I mean, it depends on what you mean in a profound, by a profound change in capitalism. Certainly the capitalism that we have that worships nothing but shareholder value and erases the moral and economic claims of workers. Yeah, that has to change. That has to change. But you know why? It isn't working for shareholders. You know, if you are a shareholder or in big business and you think the economic climate as we speak today is peachy keen with huge tariffs that change every millisecond and haphazard cuts to government programs, so you can't even get the FDA to get back to you on the phone to see if you can approve your drug. If you think this is peachy for capitalism, definitely don't change anything. I do not think, I think this has gotten so out of hand that it's not even good for big business. And I think business will eventually hear that.
What about the role of unions in terms of full-time jobs? If people are not going to have to work 3 different jobs, they need full-time labor, they need the protection of their labor. The unions are central, it seems, in the history of all this. Where do you see the unions changing their message or their role?
One of the reasons we're so far up a creek is that what is it, 6% of private employment is unionized? I don't know what it's around that. It's just some heartbreakingly low number. On the other hand, having been someone who has, been very concerned about the waning of unions, I don't think that the left can wait until unions regrow to change the political situation. I think that the care and feeding of unions, which fell by the wayside with the new Democrats and neoliberalism and Clinton, was a tragic mistake. I think it led us to where we are. I was pleased to see a union leader at the Democratic National Committee. I was not so pleased when his speech wasn't even televised in the network that I watched. But I think that certainly there's no doubt that the waning power of unions has led to the American worker getting screwed.
Finally, Joan, there is an ongoing debate. Your new book adds to it about why the Democrats lost the election. Best-selling book, I think, at the moment on the New York Times bestseller list, maybe to be displaced by yours, is Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson's Abundance, which is a kind of centrist technocratic position. There are critics of Klein's technocratic approach from the left, people like Bernie Sanders and AOC. What's your analysis of this debate? And where do you position yourself in your book? Are you in the AOC Sanders wing, or the Ezra Klein wing, or maybe a third wing that we don't even identify?
I'm a professor, so I'm a group of one. Certainly the Ezra Klein book. I mean, you live in San Francisco. I live in San Francisco. Do you think there's too little housing in San Francisco? Do you think
it goes without saying, and it goes without saying?
Yeah, I mean, do you agree?
Especially from an environmental point of view. But I think
you agree. Yeah, of course, there's too little housing in San Francisco, and of course, overregulation is part of that. It's not all of that, but it's part of that. And I think that the Ezra Klein book opens up the room for liberals to say regulation has become self-defeating in some contexts. Sort of deregulation, that's a complicated topic, but It's hard to live in San Francisco and not agree with the abundance agenda to that extent, but I don't think it goes at all far enough, because it is just a kind of placing a very small piece, which is our ability to build stuff, which is hugely important for housing. It's hugely important for climate change initiatives. But that is not all that ails American politics by any means. I think AOC and Bernie Sanders have a lot to offer. I mean, I watched with admiration the anti-oligarchy campaign. They were drawing large crowds in red states. And I think that Democrats really should listen up to that. In terms of where we need to go as a policy agenda, I think that's a more complicated problem. And, frankly, I'm not a policy person. I'm a cultural analysis and strategy person.
Well, that's an important argument. The book is out today, Outclassed, How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. It's a key question for everyone in American politics, particularly progressives. Congratulations, Joan, on the new book and on addressing this all-important question. And I'm sure I will bump into you on the streets of San Francisco in the not-too-distant future.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks for your interest. I appreciate the opportunity.
He's an expert.